Hi, and welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to cover the Bard's College of Swords class specialization from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, providing a brief description of the subclass, as well as explain and set up the various features gained. The bards who hail from the College of Swords are those who have learned the arts of swallowing and juggling swords, various styles of knife throwing, as well as mock combat demonstrations. These bards are aptly called blades for the use of the various types of edged weapons in their performances. Over time, many of these bards will become adventurers of their own right, having grown bored of the circus life or were kicked out of the circus troupe for some reason or another. However, many will suffer distrust from others due to the very nature of their specialization, simply because many of this type of bard used their trade for nefarious means, such as blackmail, assassinations, or even simple burglary. As a result, most will end up in various thieving guilds acting as enforcers of some kind, so it provides an interesting background story for anyone looking to play one of these types of characters. As per previous videos, the Bard chooses their class specialization at level 3, and this is when they will gain their first feature from the College of Swords subclass. The first feature your character will gain is called the Bonus Proficiencies feature, and it gives your character access to medium armor and the scimitar weapon in the event your character did not already have access to those. Additionally, anytime your character happens to be wielding a simple or melee weapon that your character is proficient in, it will become the spellcasting focus for your character. In this particular case, your character will not need to use or wield a musical instrument for the spellcasting focus, which makes this character class different from other bards. To set this up, you won't need to add anything to your Actions tab, but you will need to ensure your Abilities tab is updated with the available proficiencies. And it seems like there are a couple of graphical differences that have occurred here that I've just noticed. In any event, we will be able to add medium armor here, and we will be able to add a scimitar to the end of this list of weapons here. So, oops, probably shouldn't capitalize the S in this case, just to be consistent with everything else. And that's it. That's all you have to do to set up your bonus proficiencies. Also at level 3, and in addition to the bonus proficiencies feature that your character gains, your character is also going to gain access to the fighting style feature, which allows your character to select dueling or two-weapon fighting styles for your character. At the time of this recording, however, you can only choose one of them, and this choice is permanent, barring the use of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything's rules for switching feature options. The dueling option allows your character to add a +2 bonus to your overall weapon damage when you are wielding a melee weapon in one hand, meaning that you can only be wielding one weapon. And in fact, the description is very clear on that. When you are wielding a melee weapon in one hand and no other weapons, you gain that +2 bonus. Now, this fighting style is something that you can add to your Actions tab to make it a little bit more convenient for you. All you have to do is drag and drop it into place. It will create a powers group here, which we will want to rename to the College of Swords. Oops, no need to hit enter there. And then we're going to want to create a new effect and modify the actual aspect of this effect. What we want to create is a dueling option. So we're going to call this dueling, semicolon, DMG, colon, 2. And that is going to be on self, and as long as you are wielding a single-handed weapon, it will never expire and it won't have a round duration or a duration at all. And that creates the option we need for this effect. So how does your character make use of this? Well, what you would do is, as long as you are wielding one weapon, so let's use this rapier as the example, and you were not holding either of these daggers in your other hand, you would be able to add this effect to your character while your character's in the combat tracker here. And if I expand this effects button here, and I click this, it will automatically apply. When your character or you are running through a combat scenario, that's when you'll be able to make use of this particular effect. Specifically because you'll be in the combat tracker, which allows you to add effects to your character. The way this works is as follows. As long as your character is wielding a single weapon, you'll be able to add this effect to your character. And you can see here that we have it added. Now, if I target a particular creature and I roll to do damage on that creature, that is a miss. That is another miss. That's a hit. And I roll the damage, you'll see that we have a +5 bonus here, even though our weapon says +3. That means that our bonus of +2 points of damage here is automatically being applied to our damage roll. Excellent. That's the way we want that to work. The two-weapon fighting style, however, allows your character to wield two weapons at the same time, and allows your character to add the damage bonuses to both of the attacks rather than those from your character's primary weapon. In this particular case, though, you don't add anything to your Actions tab. Instead, you modify a meta feature, which is available through this hourglass option up here above the weapons title, on the weapons title. What you're looking for is this two-weapon fighting style radial option, and you click that, and it will automatically enable that for your character. So, if I had been set up to show two weapons here, we would see that both would be doing the +3 bonus to the damage. So I'm going to temporarily turn this off, add two weapons to the character to show you how that should be set up for the offhand, and then I will re-enable this. So just one second, I'll be right back. So I've gone ahead and added two scimitars to this particular character, one labeled primary, one labeled offhand. This will add two scimitars to the Actions tab here, and it will be labeled like this. All I have done is modified the label to add in information as to what is going to be the primary scimitar and what is going to be the offhand scimitar. And the other thing that I need to do is change the handedness here from primary to offhand. And you see that change here where the 1d6 +3 is now just simply a 1d6. When I go back and adjust the two-weapon fighting style radial dial here, what we should see is the +3 returns in the offhand weapon. That is exactly what we want. And we need to tell Fantasy Grounds which one of these swords is going to be the offhand weapon for this to apply appropriately. But there is a condition on being able to dual wield. The condition is that your weapons have to have the light property in order for you to be able to handle two weapons at the same time. If you have one weapon that is not labeled with the light property, you won't be able to hold a second weapon in your hand. But that's how you would actually go through and set up two-weapon fighting style, as well as the dueling fighting style when it comes to the fighting style feature. Just keep in mind, however, you can only take one fighting style. You can't have both active at the same time. The last feature that your character is going to gain at level 3 is called Blade Flourish. This feature gives your character the ability to do a couple of things. The first is that it allows your character to move an additional 10 feet until the end of your next turn, while taking an attack action on your turn. And it allows your character to bank an additional 10 feet of movement to any stage, really, that has to happen before your next turn ends. Essentially meaning that you could move an additional 10 feet in your current turn, or you can hold that 10 feet until the start of your next turn, so that if your character normally moves 30 feet in a particular movement round, you would instead be able to move 40 feet. And that's how that would actually work. There is potentially an abusive aspect to that too, because you could theoretically kick off another Blade Flourish during your second turn to give you an additional 10 feet of movement, granting you a total of 20 extra feet of movement during that one turn. That is possible. But your character would be back to normal movement on the third round of the 3 that you have taken so far. The other ability that this feature gives your character to do is to add a flourish to your attack if and only if that attack actually hits. And there are 3 flourishes that you can choose from: Defensive Flourish, Slashing Flourish, and Mobile Flourish. And we'll go over those here in a second. But before I get into that, there are 2 restrictions that come into play. The first is your attack action actually has to hit. You won't be able to make use of a flourish if your attack misses. The second restriction is that you can only make use of 1 blade flourish per turn. So let's say that your character is in turn 1. You make a blade flourish based attack. Ignore the movement for now. You then decide to take a defensive flourish. Well, if you happen to have a second attack because you have chosen the 2-weapon fighting style, you would not be able to make use of an additional flourish. It's only once per turn. However, turn 2 rolls around, regardless of whether you banked 10 feet of movement or not, it's completely immaterial to this particular example. You will now be able to make use of blade flourish again. And again, let's say you chose either defensive flourish or slashing flourish this time. Doesn't much matter. You do get the ability to use it. But at this particular point in time, your second weapon comes in again. You would also not be able to make a flourish with that attack. So as you can see, if you're dual wielding, only one of those attacks will get the ability to make use of the flourish. So let's take a look at each of these flourishes and what they mean for your character. The defensive flourish gives your character the ability to expend 1 of your bardic inspiration points and add that bardic inspiration dice roll to the total damage you dealt to the target. But you're not quite done, because in addition to that, you can take that same value from the total dice roll that you did, not in combination with other damage, but from the bardic inspiration dice, and add that value to your own armor class until the start of your next turn. But due to how the armor class changes operate within Fantasy Grounds, this is going to require a little bit of manual intervention on your behalf before it will properly apply. So first things first, what do I mean by a bardic inspiration dice roll? Well, if your character is going to be a bard, you probably should watch the videos where I introduce the bard class itself, and I'll make sure to link that in the description below. That's where I cover what a bardic inspiration dice actually is. First thing though, we want to go through and add this to our Actions tab, and we want to make sure it's added to the College of Swords power group. And that's just for organizational reasons. You'll notice though it doesn't have any effects. Well, that's normal. In this particular case, we're going to want to add 2 effects. And there. Before we actually create the first entry for the effect here, what we want to do is take a look at the bardic inspiration description. And what you will see here is that at the level that this particular character is, which right now is a 3, so theoretically I should have dropped our level into place. There we go. College of Swords. Boom. Oops. Usually I do that at the beginning of the video. Oh well. But what we want to do is actually go through and ensure that we have an understanding of what level of dice we'll be adding. In this particular case, it's going to be a D6. But at later levels, that becomes a D8 when you hit 5th level, a D10 when you hit 10th level, and a D12 when your character hits 15th level. So it's something that you're going to want to adjust over time. But for now, we need this to be a D6. I'm going to go back to the Actions tab. I've already got the effect open here, and I'm going to call this Defensive Flourish. Semicolon, and what we're going to be doing is a DMG colon 1d6. It's going to be on you, and it will expire on the next roll. Now what will happen here is that when your character makes an attack, hits, you can add this effect to your character and then make your damage roll. And I'll show you how that works here in a second. Now I want to explain the second part. This is where manual intervention will come into play. You'll want to set this up so that almost everything is ready to go. We call it Defensive Flourish as well, but in this case we're going to do AC colon And right now I'm going to leave it blank. It will also last for 1 round, and it will be on you. Now the reason why I've left that blank is we don't yet know what the value is that's going to be going in there. It could be as little as a 1, it could be a 2, or as high as a 6. So now let's show you how this actually works. The first things first, you're going to want to be in the combat tracker, as normal. I'm going to clear out the old effect here. I'm still going to have the bugbear targeted, and then I'm going to make an attack. And in this case, I have hit. I am now going to apply the Bardic Inspiration point here. I'm going to tick off that I have used one, because you do have limited uses throughout the course of your character's levels. And then I'm going to roll my damage. The value of the purple die is now going to become the value that you modify in this particular field here, which in this case is a 1. You're then going to add that effect to your character. And what happens here is that when your character is attacked, you will have a +1 to your armor class that has been added. In this particular case, our armor class is 14, and this value here will not change. But you don't need to worry that this value won't change, because what will happen is that when your character is attacked, this AC1 will automatically add a +1 to your armor class at the time that attack is being made. And it will do so until the start of your next turn. So if I use the Dungeon Master's window here to move the roll of combat down to the start of your character's next turn, what we should see is that that Defensive Flourish effect will disappear once I activate your character again. And it does. Excellent. That means this feature is working the way that we want it to. So let's move on to Slashing Flourish. And in this particular case, your character is still going to make use of a Bardic Inspiration point to do damage to the target that you were initially attacking. However, this time, instead of your character gaining a defensive bonus equivalent to that dice roll, you will be able to apply that damage to another target of your choice who happens to be within 5 feet of your character. In this particular case, we're going to want to do the setup of this effect a little bit differently. We still want to add a new effect here, but this time we want to make it a damage effect. And we're not going to be able to name it, but we want to be able to set up the dice. We want a d6 in this particular case. And then just, it will be slashing damage. So it'll be 1d6 slashing damage. Now how this is going to work is a little bit different. When in the combat tracker, when you attack a target, so let's say we were still attacking that bugbear. I'm going to make another attack roll here. Oop, that's going to be a bad one. That is still a miss. All right. So in this case, we hit. I'm going to do damage as I normally would. But then I'm going to click this blood drop effect button here. And that's going to apply damage to the bugbear and automatically roll the dice for us. Now let's say that this white happens to be next to your character and is next in line next to the bugbear. Well, what we can do is simply pick up this damage and drop it onto the white, and that would be how you would actually drop it onto the target of your choice. By separating this out, yes, it adds a little bit of an extra step, but you still have an extra step anyway to be able to apply that damage somewhere else. If we had merged it in, if you will, with the overall damage, here, that we had done here. So let's say that we had a 9 as our total instead of the additional 2 here. When we had dragged that out, it would have done 9 points of damage to the target, which was not what we would have wanted. We only want to separate out the actual dice. And what I mean by that, I can use this effect as that example. So let me apply the effect, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a damage dice roll. There isn't any way to separate out this purple dice from the total amount of damage. When we drag this over, we're going to do 14 points of damage to the white. Well, we would have had it been not partially resisted. That's not what we wanted. We wanted to only do 6 points of damage. That's the reason why we separate this out. It still allows a certain amount of automation when it comes to rolling the dice and then figuring out that value. And by using this blood drop effect, it will automatically apply it to the target that we have selected. But now it gives your character the option, or you the option, to pick that damage up and drop it on something else. Additionally, we still have to make sure that we tick off a bardic inspiration point here to show that we have used it. And finally, the mobile flourish gives your character the means to expend one bardic inspiration point and deal damage to the target, push it back, and move up to keep within 5 feet of that target. Now that sentence doesn't make a whole lot of sense right off the start, but bear with me, I'll get you there. How this works is that you would roll the inspiration die and add the damage to the total damage dealt to the target. Then you would push that target back 5 feet, plus a number of feet equal to the total amount you rolled on the bardic inspiration dice. So at a lower level, this could mean anywhere from 1 to 6 additional feet that you have pushed it back, making it a pushback value of essentially 6 to 11 feet. Now, if you're executing this on a grid-based square that is 5 feet by 5 feet, at most, your character is going to push them 3 squares away. And think on that for a second. If you're pushing something 11 feet, it's not going to be going into the one that's 10 feet away from you. It's going to be in the square that's 11 feet away from you, which is the third square. On top of that, your character can now move that distance again and close that gap so that you're always pushing the character away each time you choose to make use of this particular flourish. And that all happens in a single turn. Now the catch is, the movement portion from your character will be making use of a reaction, which means that you would not be able to make any attacks of opportunity or use any features or skills that might happen to have a reaction aspect to them. And during that reaction, your character can move up to a total of your walking speed and distance to close that gap back up to 5 feet, meaning that you can get yourself within 5 feet of the same target. This also means that you could theoretically circle around that target until you've used up all of your movement if you choose to do so. But there is a bit of discussion that could happen around the amount of movement your character is going to have in relation to that reaction. There are going to be some DMs who are going to argue that if your character has a total of 30 feet of movement, and they have already used 30 feet of movement to get into range of the target before your character even attacked, then your character would not have any movement left to be able to make use of it during the reaction. Other DMs will allow your character to move an additional 30 feet of movement, but when you consider that even at higher levels, your character can really only push that target up to a maximum of 17 feet away, you're not really going to get much of a movement anyway, so there's really no limitation in my mind where it would be a problem. To me, I tend to rule in the middle. I simply state that once your target has been pushed back, you can simply move to within 5 feet of it, and that's as far as your character can go. Now, we've already got the bulk of everything we need set up in order to reflect whatever effects we want to apply during the mobile flourish phase. Essentially, we've seen how to apply the damage through this. So if we go back into our combat tracker and we attack the bugbear, and then we've done the 1d6 of bardic dice roll here in this particular case, then all I have done is pushed my bugbear back by 6 feet total. Your character then moves that 6 foot in order to get close to the character again. In this particular case, the bugbear is going to be going back 2 squares, and you're going to be going forward 2 squares, and that's it. That's all that's going to happen. However, the damage has already been done, so there's really nothing else you need to set up when it comes to mobile flourish, which brings us to the end of the blade flourish feature. At level 6, your character is now going to gain access to the extra attack feature, meaning that when your character makes an attack with a capital A on an attack action, you will be able to make use of 2 separate attacks and still potentially have a third you could make use of from a bonus attack if you happen to be wielding 2 weapons or are making an unarmed strike. A lot of players don't realize that while they might be making use of their swords to make their primary attacks, they always have a bonus attack action with their offhand, be it armed or not. There are some rules and guidelines around that, however, in that your character must be wielding 2 light weapons and the offhand weapon must be equal to or smaller than the size of the primary weapon. For instance, wielding 2 rapiers is not possible, nor can your character dual wield longswords, but your character can use 2 short swords, 2 scimitars, or any other weapon that has the light property. You could wield a short sword and a scimitar if you wish. It does not matter if you're wielding 1 or 2 weapons, you can still make a total of 3 attacks, 2 from your primary weapon and 1 from your offhand. But there are cases where you cannot make use of this feature, such as attacks where a reaction is in play. Your character won't be able to make use of the extra attack feature because those reactions generally restrict your response to a single melee or spell-based attack in the case of the bard. There is, however, no need to set up this extra feature in your character's actions tab. You just need to remember to use it. The one thing I want to show you is that while I have been leveling this particular character up, I have not been modifying the bardic dice rolls here, but this character is now level 14. I'm going to show you what generally has to happen. And I'm going to open up Bardic Inspiration again and scroll to the bottom of the description. So there is a change that you need to make to your Defensive Flourish and to the Damage Flourish that you'll be doing for potential use of Slashing and the Mobile Flourishes that you get. You want to make sure that at level 5 you increase this 1d6 to a 1d8 and make sure you modify this damage one as well and remove this by right clicking on the dice itself so that you get this clear dice option and then dropping the next level die into place, in this case a d8. When your character reaches level 10, you'll want to also remove this and drop a 1d10 into place. At the same time, modify this so that instead of 1d8, you'll be doing 1d10. And that's where our character currently stands because they are not level 15. They are only level 14. And that brings me to the feature that you gain at level 14, where your character is going to gain a feature called Master's Flourish. And this feature gives your character the ability to save your Bardic Inspiration dice when you're making use of the Blade Flourish feature, and simply make use of a d6 in place of that Bardic Inspiration dice roll. There is no limitation to how often you can make use of this other than those defined within the Blade Flourish itself, which really aren't any. And the choice is still yours, meaning you can still use a Bardic Inspiration point if you choose to do so. So let's go ahead and quickly set this up. I'm going to take Master's Flourish and put it into place. And that is up here. I'm going to add it to the College of Swords group. And that sets it up here. Now, what I want to do is simulate the same kind of effects, if you will, that we have when it comes to the Defensive Flourish for the damage roll, as well as for the damage effect. So I'm going to add 2 new effects. One is going to be a normal effect. The other is going to be a damage effect. And in this particular case, I'm going to call this Defensive Flourish, or sorry, Master's Flourish, semicolon, DMG colon 1d6. And it's going to be on you, and it will, actually, it doesn't really expend. Yeah, let's set it up to expend on the next dice roll, just to be thorough. And then, in this particular case, I want to add a new dice and simply drop a 1d6 into place. And now I'll show you how you would make use of this in relation to your character. During combat, and I'm going to stop picking on the bugbear and attack something else for a change. Let's say that I have hit the succubus. I'm now going to make use of my damage roll, but before I do that, I choose to make use of my Defensive Flourish. But I choose not to make use of a Bardic Inspiration dice. Instead, I click this effect here, and then I roll my damage. And let's say that I'm using the Defensive Flourish in this particular case. Now what I have to do is I still have to modify the Defensive Flourish stat for here and add whatever value comes up for the purple die. So in this case, it's a 1, which I already have set. But generally, you would go through and you would modify it and set this to whatever value you need it to be. And that's in place of a Bardic Inspiration point. You'll notice that I didn't tick one off. I still have the option to do so, and instead of making use of the Master's Flourish, I could go back and make use of the original Defensive Flourish effect. So let's say we're into another round, that is no longer there. I connect with the Succubus again, I apply this particular effect, make my damage roll. In this case, I'm going to get a D10 as my bonus damage. And in this particular case, I'm also gaining a defensive bonus of 3 points as opposed to 1 point. So now I need to change this to a 3. And then I apply that effect to the character. But I now have to make sure that I tick off a Bardic Inspiration point. And that's because I chose to use this over this. The other thing that can come into play is that when you're doing either the slashing or the mobile flourish, you would roll this dice during normal combat situations if you're choosing to make use of a Bardic Inspiration point. But if you decide not to use that point, you can now just simply click this for that particular die roll and then do whatever you need to do when it comes to the damage. So I'm going to drop that onto the white, for example, for the slashing effect. Or I'm going to add the 2 points to the 5 points for the movement. It all comes down to which flourish you chose to use, and you have to declare that before you make your damage roll. And that is essentially how Master's Flourish can come into play. You can choose to take one of these effects here and apply it to your character or do the damage, but when you do so, you will tick off a Bardic Inspiration point. Or you can choose to make use of this particular effect or this particular damage roll and not tick this off. That's how Master's Flourish works. But that brings us to the end of the video when it comes to explaining how to make use of the College Swords. So in conclusion, the College of Swords creates a character that is essentially a duelist and is able to throw flair essentially into each swing of their sword to inspire others to greater feats. It is also one of the few non-fighter classes that gains the ability to dual-wield weapons through their fighting style options, in addition to getting extra attacks, giving you the ability to have a little bit of variety in your character. And the variety comes from the different types of fighting styles that you can choose from. You may decide at level 10 to make a change, or whenever the next ability score improvement point comes into play. But this does bring us to the end of the subclasses list of features, and thus the end of where we can go with this particular Bard's subclass. I hope you found it informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.